listening to the Metal Command Podcast.
Greetings, everybody, and welcome to another edition of the Metal Command Podcast. Tony here with you. And today let's talk about former guitar player from Slayer, Kerry King, and the upcoming project he has been talking about that he has been working on. And I'm here to talk about this because I put a post up on the Facebook page about, asking people, what is your favorite Slayer album? What do you think this project will sound like? What do you want it to sound like? And I have a lot of really interesting responses. So in this podcast, I'm going to talk about what I think his next project may sound like, what I think about the fact that he named the band after himself, because there's a lot of people that don't like that for whatever reason. And I'm going to talk about the legacy that Slayer has left us. I mean, they are definitely one of the most incredible and influential bands in the metal scene. And they were around for decades, and they are one of the pioneers, really. I mean, they are one of the bands that really influenced our scene. Slayer's influence and legacy, it has really impacted the metal scene in a very good way. So many bands were influenced by them, and they were much different than, say, the other bands of their time. They were different from Metallica and Exodus and so on and so forth, and different from Megadeth. I mean, a lot of those bands were unique in their way, but Slayer was definitely a lot different, and they did influence a lot of bands over the years. Definitely a band that is missed. And let me talk first about the solo project from Kerry King, and then I'll get into Slayer here in a minute. My thing is this, as far as naming the project after himself, calling it Kerry King, right? And as you see, there's a logo here with his picture, and obviously you see the band logo itself. I don't have a problem with the logo. The logo don't bother me. It really doesn't bother me. A lot of people are thinking it's crap. It looks stupid, but whatever. I think the logo looks fine to me. That's not something I really care about. And the fact he named the band after himself, that doesn't bother me either. What I care about is, what is your musical output, right? And honestly, I'm glad he named the band after himself. And I'm going to tell you what the advantages of that are. The first advantage is this. If you go under a different band name or a different brand, keep in mind, Kerry King was in the same band for decades. If you mention his name in the metal scene, everybody automatically says Slayer, right? If you say Slayer, what do they mention? You'll mention Tom Araya, Jeff Hanneman, Kerry King, right? You mention those guys. So naming it after himself means he doesn't have to take another band name and try to build up that band name itself, or build up that brand in a sense. Because really, if you think about it, your band name is like a brand name, right? You basically are building up that name. And it's a lot easier if you do it under your own name. Number one, you don't have to worry about coming up with a band name. Number two, you don't have to worry about taking a band name that somebody else might have. You just use your name. And so when people see Kerry King, oh yeah, that's the guy from Slayer, as opposed to a band with a different name that nobody's ever heard of. Because we live in a society right now with a very short attention span. And if you go under a different band name, or you have a different brand, most people are going to be like, what is that? And pass by it because they don't know it. So then you have to try and build an audience that will gravitate to that band name itself. Whereas if you say Kerry King, you don't have to work as hard at doing that, because let's face it, everybody in the metal scene, we all know who he is. So I completely get why he would name it after himself, and I don't have a problem with that. In fact, I think it's probably better that he does that, as opposed to coming up with a brand new band name and then trying to build a fan base from there. I'm sure he'll have people that are Slayer fans that would gravitate to that, but it's a lot easier for him to get a lot of those fans to come over if he makes it, basically puts the band name under his own name. The second thing that it does is that, if you ever notice, a lot of guys, when they do solo albums, they may do different stuff on those solo albums than what they are known for. Okay? And if you listen to Bruce Dickinson's solo stuff, it's definitely, it's metal, but there are a lot of songs that are a bit different from what Iron Maiden has done, especially like when you listen to something like The Chemical Wedding, for example, right? A lot different than, what Iron Maiden has done. And the thing is, if he wants to try something different, now we all know and heard the rumor that a lot of the music sounds like Slayer. He's got Paul Bostaff, the former drummer of Slayer, who's played in a lot of great bands over the years. He has him playing on the album. So he's only confirmed that's the only musician he's confirmed for this record. He hasn't talked about anybody else yet. And you can, if you want to get out of that element, you can do that and have more freedom to do that because it will be more accepted by the fans as opposed to if you did that when you were with Slayer. Okay? And people that do solo stuff get a little more freedom when it comes to the fan base. It becomes more, like if they do something different, it's accepted a lot more than, say, if he had done it with the band they are known for. Like a lot of people say Risk from Megadeth should have been a solo album, which I think Dave Mustaine mentioned that the original intention is that it was going to be a solo album. I could be wrong on that, but I believe, if I remember from an interview, he did state that. Okay? And I think that's another advantage he has. So if he has another urge to do something that deviates from what he has normally done musically, I think he can do that. As far as what I think it's going to sound like, personally, if you go by the rumors, and in my opinion, it's going to have a similar sound to Slayer. It might be a little bit different, but I think you are going to hear some similarities. I mean, especially from somebody that's been writing songs the same way for, 40 some years, right? However long Slayer is. I think Slayer formed, 81? I could be wrong. And I think the first album came out 83 or 84, Show No Mercy, which, by the way, Metal Blade's reissuing. I'll talk about that here in a second. But I really think that it's going to sound a lot like that. I'm interested to hear what it does sound like. I'm interested to hear the lineup he has on this. Now, there are people saying, Phil Anselmo might be singing. There's no confirmation on that. And even if he was, like anything else, I don't really make a predetermination of what it's going to sound like or react until I hear the actual music. So time will tell what's going to happen, but I'm definitely looking forward to a project by him. Now let's talk about Slayer, because the other thing I asked in that post was, hey, what is your favorite Slayer album? Right? A majority of people, if you go and look at the reactions, and if you talk to a majority of Slayer fans, most of them will say one of the following three albums: Rain and Blood, South of Heaven, Seasons in the Abyss. And to me, that's like the band at its peak. In my opinion, I agree with that. Actually, I like some of the Metal Blade stuff too. A lot of people say Hell Awaits too. A lot of people love the album Hell Awaits for whatever reason. Here's my take on Slayer. When it comes to these, the quote, Big Four, as most of you know, my favorite thrash band is Exodus. For obvious reasons, right? I mean, my show, The Metal Command, wouldn't exist if Exodus didn't exist. Exodus is like my favorite thrash band of all time. But when I compare them to their contemporaries, like when it comes to like a band like Metallica, for example, I like the first 5 albums and the newest one the best. A lot of the other stuff's kind of hit or miss with me, right? Megadeth, I like their stuff mostly. There's a couple albums I can do without, but for the most part, I like them a lot. And then when it comes to like Anthrax, I can't really think of an album I dislike by them. So Slayer is under this category, which for me, everything from the first album through Seasons of the Abyss, I think is gold. I like every record from Show No Mercy through Seasons of the Abyss. In fact, Show No Mercy, in my opinion, and I'm really excited for this reissue that Metal Blade is putting out. They're putting out like a box set, a vinyl reissue of the album, which I think is really, really cool. It's definitely something I'm going to be picking up. But when it comes to the debut albums, and this is a preference, I'm not going by what I think is the most influential. This is a preference, okay? And I like Show No Mercy better than the debut albums from the other big four bands. I like it better than Killing Is My Business. I like it better than Kill 'Em All and Fistful of Metal. By Anthrax, obviously. And, so the debuts from Megadeth, Metallica, and Anthrax, I like Slayer's debut the best. Now, I have always said that Kill 'Em All is probably the most influential out of all of those four bands, but Show No Mercy is my favorite album of the debut albums these four bands put out. And if I threw Exodus in there, I would like Bonded by Blood better than all four of those albums, right? But anyhow, Show No Mercy to me is a very strong first effort. I love the songs on that thing. Black Magic, Die by the Sword, The Antichrist, you have Cryonics. Just everything on that album is gold, in my opinion. And then we get into the 90s, and for me, that's where it gets a little bit shaky. Divine Intervention, honestly, was a big disappointment for me when that came out. I remember going up to a music store to buy that CD, and when I heard it, I was kind of really disappointed by it for a few reasons. Number one, the songwriting I don't think was all that great on it. And again, we are going into the 90s when a lot of these metal bands really weren't putting out their best material. I mean, some were, but very few of them were. You had a different drummer. You went from Dave Lombardo to Paul Bostaph. I wasn't thrilled with that, to be honest. And here's the thing. A lot of people don't realize how much a drummer can change the sound of a band. A drummer's really, really important. It's probably, the drummer's like the foundation of what your band sounds like. And while I think Paul Bostaph is an excellent drummer, they sounded different without Lombardo. That's just how it is. I'm not saying one or the other is better. I just think that they sounded different without Dave Lombardo. I was initially disappointed in that. Now, on the flip side, I like some of the albums that Paul Bostaph has played on. I mean, he's played on some great records with this band. But it gets a little dicey. Undisputed Attitude, I mean, it was okay. Diabolus and Musica, I don't think was as bad of an album as everybody thinks it is. And I love the Christ Illusion album. And the other albums, they're not bad. Like, they're not terrible. They're okay. But Slayer after Seasons in the Abyss was kind of hit or miss for me. Now, the one thing about Slayer that was definitely not hit or miss, though, was the live show. The live show was fantastic. I mean, they really had a killer live show. It didn't matter who was playing in the band. When you went and saw Slayer live, I mean, they were like it. I mean, they were on top of their game throughout their career. Now, the one thing about Slayer, the biggest thing I liked about him was the guitar duo of Jeff Hanneman and Kerry King. And I'm going to get into the last album, Repentless. When Jeff Hanneman passed away and was not in the band anymore, to me, they lost too much. I mean, the band did not sound the same without Jeff in it. And everybody knows Gary Holt is my favorite thrash guitar player of all time. And he came in and did what he could to fill in that guitar spot for Jeff Hanneman's absence. But to be honest with you, the band was never the same for me when Jeff Hanneman passed away. And I could say the same thing, like if Kerry King wasn't with us and Jeff Hanneman was, I would say the same thing. Those two guys together were a force to be reckoned with. And losing either one of them takes away from the band. Because when I listened to the album Repentless, the last album they put out, I actually thought it was pretty good. But it definitely was missing something. And that element missing was Jeff Hanneman. Now, I did say that Dave Lombardo leaving the band changed the band's sound. But the loss of Jeff Hanneman was a lot more significant to me than the loss of Dave Lombardo. So that's where I see Slayer. I mean, again, they had a legacy like none other. They really did. I mean, they influenced so many bands. They had the respect of their peers. like Megadeth and Anthrax and a lot of those guys. Everybody respected the band and their musical abilities and the influence that they had. And for me, my go-to album, like if I want to go listen to Slayer, I'm listening to Show No Mercy and Seasons of the Abyss. Seasons to me was their peak. And that's still one of the most incredible albums that's ever been written and recorded. I mean, really, that album is that good. I can't remember the name of the live album. What was it called? They had a live album that came out right after that. The name, Decade of Aggression, that's what it was called. Decade of Aggression is one of my top 10 live albums of all time, which is going to be a video I'm going to do, my top 10 live albums of all time. But Decade of Aggression by Slayer, it was one of the first live albums I ever bought, actually. But Seasons of the Abyss is just still an incredible landmark release by these guys. So I'm curious as to what you think. What is your favorite Slayer album? What do you think the next Kerry King project will sound like? Sound off in the comments. Thanks for watching. Stay metal.